All right, so here we have a basic patch. If you pause the video now, you can actually build this patch on your own quite quickly so that you can follow along and kind of like interactively play around with this stuff. So we have a rect object, which is the square wave oscillator for MaxMSP. It's actually anti-aliased, as in it doesn't produce frequencies like above the limit of your digital system. And we have a little bit of volume control. And today I've added the dB2A function so that we can control our volume with something that has a little more meaning to us, or something we're used to seeing, as in terms of like decibels, like we'd see on a mixer. So we can put in -6 dB, and it drops the amplitude down to half. We can drop it down to -12, then we get quarter, -18. You know, we could do this math in our heads if we wanted to, but sometimes it's just easier to be able to call out reference decibel levels and not have to do the math mentally. So I'm going to leave it at about -12 for now. We have a 100 hertz square wave with a bias of, or like a duty cycle of 0.5. So half the wave is up, half the wave is down. Let's go ahead and check this out. Sweet. Let's see if we can do anything about making that square wave a little more easy to see in the oscilloscope. So let's open up the help file for the scope and see if we can just copy the default from the help file and see if that looks any better. Because I'd really like to be able to see this square wave. Now the frequency might be too high for it to be of any use. So let's just knock it down to 10. There we go. Now we can actually see some elements of this square wave. And if we start playing with these, oh, sorry, that's not the parameter I think it was. That's the sync. This is the duty cycle. So as you can see, it goes 50%, it's like even high and low. And then if we go towards 1, if we go towards 1, we get more low and less high. If we go towards 0, we get more high and less low. But 0.5 is a good place for an audio square wave for musical purposes. I'm just going to delete that because we don't need to control it that much. All right, great. I've got a square wave. Cool. What can I do with a square wave? Well, a square wave is a rather rich tone, and we can actually do cool things by taking away from some sound from the tone. We can do some basic subtractive synthesis. So let's grab some form of low-pass filter. Now that we have one pole, low res, we have a couple. But the one I really like is not going to be obvious when you're looking for a low-pass filter unless you look in the reference section. So let's go to like one pole, for example. And then let's go to the help file. And we're going to see the C also. And then we see all of the other things that are similar, you know, filters that you can build from scratch. The biquad comb filter. We'll go into that at another point. Resonant low-pass filter, but here's the one that's really fun. The state variable filter. This one has a lovely sound to it, so we're going to go ahead and grab that. It's also the state variable filter is, at least in my opinion, a little bit more immediate in its usefulness versus the other more rudimentary filters. You have to like build some sort of control module to affect the coefficients to make them musically useful. So let's just get this guy, state variable filter. Let's do 100 hertz and 0.5. As the resonance. Let's check out what this sounds like. Ooh, a nice purr. Let's bring up the frequency a bit. There we go. And just so that kind of sounds like a, it's not as simple as a sine wave, but it's like a nice soft round tone. Let's bring up a spectroscope. Just because I'm curious as to what is it what's it going to look like when we start resonating things. example. Let's go up to 1,000. And then let's go up to, this might be a little harsh, so watch out for harshness. Okay, not too bad. So we're not perfectly harmonically in line with the source material. But as we get closer to 1, on this we get a steeper and steeper and more pronounced resonance. Cool. So that is the low pass output. We also have a high pass and a band pass, which is also kind of satisfying. Now I find with this particular object that I end up stacking them quite often to get a more severe sound. So let's take 2 low pass filters and stack them together, and we'll control them both with this knob. Oops, overdid it. So pretty rich sound. Let's just check it out when we sweep it. See what kind of sound quality we get from this. Oh. As you can hear, we are clipping because I've gone too far. I'm actually too resonant. So I am going to take away this one because I don't want to go through all of the work of setting up the gain stages so that I avoid the clipping. There are lots of ways to do that, where you get the beautiful resonance and you avoid clipping, but that's a little bit more of an advanced topic. So even here we're getting some resonance, some peaks. It's pretty satisfying stuff. Now, I also like to hear, what does this thing sound like when I go to like rather extreme low frequencies where I'm just getting a series of clicks? Let's go down to like 2 hertz, for example. So now we're not overexciting the filter, so we can get pretty resonant without it totally distorting out. This can be pretty satisfying because we're getting way up there. All right, so that's kind of fun. But where it's maybe the most fun is when it changes over time, when I'm actually physically moving that knob around. Now, some things we've done in the past are create little envelopes. So let's think of like a cycle object. Oh, if I connect the cycle to the number, nothing happens. What do I do? What do I do? Okay, so there's a way to convert things from audio speed or audio sampling rate to event rate. So we need to sample that audio and output a number. And there's something kind of like, totally forgetting the name of it, something like snapshot or something of that nature. I believe snapshot needs an argument that is like how often it measures the audio signal and outputs a number. So the interval, optional argument for interval. So we're going to go ahead and do this at close to frame rate. So we're keeping up pretty well. Let's see here. Let's do 6 hertz. Snapshot it, and then I'm going to do all the math in the event space rather than the audio space, maybe saving some CPU cycles in case I've built myself a more complex patch. I don't want to do math unnecessarily in the audio domain. I want to do it where it's less calculations per second. So it's going to be oscillating again between +1 and -1, and we need this to be more of like a just positive numbers. So we're going to add 1. We'll divide by 2 to get this into a range of numbers between 1 and 0. Actually, I don't like doing math is silly. Why do I want to do all that math when I can just z-map it? -1, +1, and then the range of numbers I want to oscillate between, let's say the lowest frequency is 50 and the highest frequency is 1500. These are very arbitrary numbers, not necessarily musically relevant numbers at the moment. And let's take a look and see what that sounds like. A little too fast. Fair enough. Oh, and we are getting some unnecessary artifacts. So even though the snapshot is pretty frequent, let's take it down. Let's really tighten it up. Much better. Right, because that polling rate, that rate at which it takes a measurement of the audio signal, now affects how smooth the changes in the parameter are in the over in the audio space. So just again, for example, let's take this up to 125 milliseconds, so a little slower than 1/10 of a second. Now that could be interesting if that's what you're going for. But if you want to have that smooth filter, we need to do something to smooth that out. One approach is to take much more frequent samples and minimize the amount of change between the individual samples. So if we take that down to 3 milliseconds, that's going to do that. But at some point, this might get a little weird. 3 milliseconds is actually doing pretty well. I also don't know the cost of 3 milliseconds, the CPU cost. Might not be relevant, but if I were sending this control data around, like if I was sending it out through MIDI or something like this, 3 milliseconds would be, might be like too much for certain MIDI interfaces or something like this. So let's actually do what we can do to just smooth out the data. Let's go ahead and see if there is a smoothing function. Let's see, is this the... Oh, this is just purely data. So we're going to make our own smoothing function. This is going to be really helpful because we can reuse this function in a bunch of different places. So we're going to make a little list of 2 items. First item being the data that we're going to smooth. The second item is the amount of smoothing we're going to apply. And just for convenience, we're going to drive this thing with the controls for the interval at which we pull the data. All right, the next thing we'll need is something called, and this number is not going to be usable anymore. So we're going to get rid of him. But I would still like to see things, so I'm going to use another number object, number tilde. So this object will let us see the signal as it's passing through. All right, so we're making a list. It's the data and then the smoothing factor, and then we're going to use something called a line object. And a line object makes an audio-based vector or signal or line from wherever it was previously to the new data over the course of however many milliseconds we tell it to take to get there. And just for clarity, we'll just drop that in there and see if it'll display for us. All right, so we're going variable frequency, measuring that frequency, scaling, or measuring the audio signal that comes out of that oscillator, scaling that signal to a range that's useful, and then smoothing out the changes in that signal. Oh, it would help if we plugged in the frequency to the frequency port. I may have broken something. We're just going to go ahead and delete some text out of here and reinitiate this object. There we go. Getting smooth changes. For some reason, I'm not hearing result. Debugging time. So one thing we'll do is just delete this connection here. And I just want to make sure that we still have control of this object and it's behaving as we'd expect it to. Okay, cool. Okay. I believe there may be something to do with the output of this maybe not being consistent audio rate. Anyway, so you saw a couple ways to debug a situation. One is disconnect a patch, get a control variable in there and see if you still have control of your situation. If you do, then we know that the object is not crashed or broken, and we can then explore what's going on with our control signal. Nice. All right. It's a little chaotic, little out of control. But now that we have this line object in here, we might be able to, I'm going to clean up this stuff. We don't need to see the number. I don't need to see this display. It's not useful. Let's explore what we can do with this line object in terms of generating envelopes, because this could be really, really cool. And we're going to generate them in text format. There are objects like there's a breakpoint function generator or something like this. Function. If you like doing the visual thing where you draw your ADSRs and this sort of stuff, I love this thing. It's really cool. It just takes up a lot of real estate, and I usually don't play with it in this visual sense that much. If I need to do a bunch of visual things like with ADSRs, I'm over in DAW. But in terms of using Max in a generative context, I can actually just see what this data looks like as a list. Let's see if I can push out the list. I think there's some commands I might have to do, like dump or something like this. Or maybe it's bang, where I output a bunch of data. All points in line format. I'm forgetting exactly how to use it. Obviously, I could go into the help file and be reminded about how this whole joint works. But that's not what I'm interested in. I just wanted you to know that that exists and you can play with it. It's awesome. I'm going to make a more involved list that will help me generate an envelope. So the first thing I want to do is jump to a high point with this envelope. I want to jump to the high frequency point. That's going to be 1500 hertz. I want to jump there really quickly, but not instantaneously. 0 would be instantaneously. I want to get there as quickly as possible without it creating an audio click. I then want to slide down at a pretty good clip. Let's go down to 50 hertz, and let's take a quarter of a second or 250 milliseconds to get there. And let's check this out. Oh, and I need to trigger this somehow. So let me just get a bang object, little button here. Let's just make sure I can do this the way I want to. Oh, I'm realizing this guy's at a low frequency, so it's here. Let's do that. Let's bring it up in frequency. Right? So there we have kind of a nice acid-based sound. Let's go ahead and build on that a little bit and see how we would take this out to kind of a musical control level. Again, this is stuff that already exists out there, but it's a fun learning tool to go ahead and build it from scratch and feel how all the parts come together and how everything works. So the first thing I'm going to do is get an MTOF on here. So this way I can use MIDI notes to set the pitch. I'm going to set this resonance over here where it's out of the way. Now there's two things I need to know if I'm going to create like a musical note. I need a way to have a note on and a note off. So let's see here. Let's do node in. Pitch we're going to send over here, and then the amplitude, Z map, it's going to come in 0 to 127, and I want it to go out -30 to -12. So when the node is on, it's going to output -12, and when it's off, it's going to go to -30, -130, which is like close to -infinity. I'm sorry, -130. And in terms of scaling, 0. Anything times 0 is 0. Boom, instant audio volume reduction. Let me get a controller plugged in real quick. And now, here's the fun part, is I can actually turn on my audio and leave it on, because only when notes are played do we get a sound. Now I have this filter dialed in so tight that I think the filter is being, what do you call it, not being triggered. I think I need to trigger it, but I need to trigger it only when there's a node on. So let's do greater than 0, and this is going to give me a toggle. So it should be node on. Oh, sorry. After the mapping, it's going to be, let's say, greater than -13. There we go. And then we want this to do something. You know, that code's a little hard for me to read. Let me take it up here, and we'll do greater than 0. So before the ZMap math, because we know it's 0 is always going to be off. We'll keep it toggle for clarity. We can see that. Okay, so nice. All right, and then we're going to select 1. So when this input is 1, it triggers something. So this should give us, every time we play the note, it should give us that nice little envelope. Oh, and now we're getting the clicking when I change the volume. I'm changing the volume so quickly that I'm getting that a little bit of click, and I don't want that. So I'm going to create another smoothing factor, F. We'll just do like a very short smoothing. So this is not going to be a very good musical envelope, but that's all right. Now what might be also interesting is if this resonance was tied to the frequency that the instrument is playing. So let's see. I'm going to route this thing around. There's some smoother ways to do routing, but just for speed and clarity, I'm going to try to route it this way. It's going to be messy, isn't it? So I'm just going to be messy, go directly across, and then I'm going to try to see if I can route it. There we go. Route it cleanly. Now I would like this frequency to not stop at the pitch of the oscillator, but like an octave, at least an octave below. So let's divide by 2 and use that as the thing here. Now, does you who know Max know that I've created a problem? It's not the worst of problems to have, but I do want to do something else. I would like, rather than me having to press the button a bunch of times, I want to have this thing generate the notes over and over and over and over and over again. So instead of select, I am going to create a metro. Sorry. I need to make room for it, actually. Metro. And we'll do 125, because that's like 8th notes or 16th notes at 120 beats per minute. I just happen to know that off the top of my head because I'm a nerd. And let's give ourselves the ability to change this. And let's check it out. All right, I've got a couple things here that might be annoying. I'm trying to change the envelope at 125. I'm triggering the envelope every 1/8 of a second, and the envelope takes 1/4 of a second to execute. So perhaps we change this to 250. So then the envelope takes the same amount of time. This will be a slower tempo by a lot. Right? So there we have a basic subtractive synthesis square wave filtered oscillator with an arpeggiating filter sweep that kind of at least reminds you a little bit of some of those early electronic music bass lines. You could take this a lot further if you want to do it by learning Max through this whole process, or of course you can jump over to Serum or Operator and Ableton Live, maybe Massive if you're into native instruments. There are several other tools that allow you to do this in pre-built form, where you're just adjusting parameters and focusing on the music creation. But if you want to get into the core of how does the synthesis and the control systems work, and if you wanted to build your own, this tool is awesome for that. Go ahead and check out other tutorials if you want to learn some more about Max MSP and digital audio processing.